the Atlantic Coast Conference. And before I dive into the Atlantic Coast Conference, there's a couple of things I want to talk about here. Back on July 22nd, during the opening part of ACC Media Day, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips made it known to the media there that the ACC boss to fight Clemson, Florida State lawsuits for as long as it takes. In this ESPN article that I have, that was written by Adria Addison, ESPN senior writer, says ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips said Monday that the league will fight lawsuits with Clemson and Florida State for as long as it takes, adding this conference is bigger than any one school or schools as the league prepares to enter football season embarking in courtrooms with two of its premier programs. In his opening remarks at ACC kickoff, Phillips vigorously defended the league as questions have swirled about its long-term future. Florida State and Clemson are engaged in lawsuits against the ACC over the league's withdrawal penalty and grant of rights, and the league has filed countersuits against both schools. This is what the commissioner has said. Quote, I can state that we will fight to protect the ACC and our members for as long as it takes. We are confident in this league and that it will remain a premier conference in college athletics for the long-term future. These disputes continue to be extremely damaging, disruptive, and incredibly harmful to the league. Close quote. So the battle between the two premier school programs, whatever you want to use for the ACC, are trying to find a way to get themselves out of the ACC. And consequently, the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, and the Big Ten both say they do not want to add any more schools to their leagues. So Florida State was looking forward to joining the Big Ten. They came out and said, we don't want to add anybody else. The ACC came out before anybody can throw any doubts out there. Could Florida State join Florida in the SEC? Could Clemson join South Carolina in the SEC? And they said no. All right. And then there's another article that caught my eyes, and it's coming from Clemson. I will get to Clemson in a minute, so let's get to the preview, all right? As we all know, Florida State Seminoles were your 2023 ACC champions, defeating Louisville in a really not interesting game. We knew the outcome was going to be, but thus going undefeated, and we all know what happened. They didn't make the college football playoffs despite being undefeated because the injury to their quarterback then was Jordan Travis, and the committee felt like it didn't do us any justice putting them in the playoffs. Thus, they get blown out in the Orange Bowl by Georgia because starters felt disingenuous about the bowl game because they felt they should have been playing for a national championship game, and then they get blown out by who was then the back-to-back national champions of the Georgia Bulldogs, who felt some type of way as well, and they went in on them. That's Florida State. For Clemson, down here for Clemson, they went 9-4 overall and 4-4 in ACC play. Losing at home to Florida State in a game they should have won. Losing to Duke. I mean, there was some losses in there. You scratch your head, and you was like, really? Wow, Clemson is having a bad year. All right. And then you have your new schools, the SMU Mustangs, the Stanford Cardinals, and the California Golden Bears are now official members of the ACC, making the ACC a 17-team league. Excuse me. There are now 17 teams in this conference. We already talked about the lawsuit of Florida State and Clemson, lawsuits for leagues withdrawal penalty and grants of rights, ACC countersuits. I already talked about it to open it up. Florida State is favorite to repeat as ACC champions, and the Clemson Tigers are second in that media poll. And those of you who are looking for the poll, here you go. 81 votes, first place votes were for Florida State, 55 to Clemson, 17 to the Miami Hurricanes, who are third. Fourth is the NC State Wolfpack with the Louisville Cardinals, who lost to the Florida State Seminoles in the ACC championship game last year, coming in fifth. And you see Virginia Tech, SMU, the first new member, coming in at 7. North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Cal at 10, with Duke 11, Syracuse, Pitt, Boston College, Wake Forest, Virginia, and Stanford coming in last at 17. Now, before I continue on, Dabo felt some type of way. Dabo Sweeney by proposed roster change impact on walk-ons. Okay, this was back on July 25th. And this is what took place. All right. Let me go back a bit to the main part. Dave Hill, ESPN staff writer, okay, he wrote this article. College football soon might be saying goodbye to walk-on players, and Clemson coach Dabo Swinney, a former walk-on player himself at Alabama, said it would be a huge loss for the sport. As part of the settlement in the House versus NCAA case, schools can no longer be limited in the number of scholarships they offer. Although roster size can still be capped, administrators were clicking to push for a lower cap, likely between 105 to 110 players, according to multiple sources, to reduce expenses that would come with a huge jump in scholarships. The result would be that many current walk-ons will be forced out of participating on their current teams, causing an uproar amongst coaches. One of them being Dabo Swinney. Dabo says, "quote This is the most unit coaches have been. This is the most united coaches have been in the history of football. It's so frustrating. That doesn't happen if Stallion hadn't seen me. I can't even imagine how different things would have been." When he says this quote, he was talking about him because that was when he began his career as a walk-on receiver at Alabama, originally earning a scholarship after 2 years on a scout team. That experience, he said, led him to a job as a grad assistant and originally as a receivers coach for Gene Stallion, and ultimately to being a two-time national championship coach at the University of Clemson. So, walk-on, that wasn't the only one. That was not the only coach that came out and said this is wrong. You are doing the college football sport a disservice when you talk about walk-ons, okay? Walk-on is a vital part of college football. Guys who didn't earn a scholarship, guys who weren't looked at as a top-tier athlete, coming in, working their asses off, busting their butt day in, day out, night in, night out, and eventually being rewarded for their hard-earned work. And I'm with the coaches on this one. You cannot get rid of the walk-ons. Do you go back and look at all of College Games Days stories, videos, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to walk-ons and how the entire team enjoys seeing a player who had to walk on earn his scholarship the hard way, instead of just giving scholarships away to players you think is who they think they are. Because not all of the scholarship players live up to the hype that they are. Let's just be honest. But walk-ons, coaches know that guy has come in, he has put in the work, he has busted his ass off countless times. I can finally give him a scholarship. College football, as we both know, some traditions need to stay the way they are. This is one of them. Do not mess with the walk-ons of college football. It's a beautiful story every time we see it when it comes to walk-ons, all right? So that's what I wanted to do, all right? Now that I went through that, now let's just get to the top 5. So Florida State comes in at number 1 in the media polls, followed by Clemson. Miami is 3rd, NC State is 4th, and Louisville is 5th. So let's look at the key games and let's see who can come out of this. So as you look at the Florida State, the reigning defending ACC champions, they have a pretty interesting schedule here. Okay, their key game will be a matchup against the American Conference's Memphis Tigers on September 14th. They go to SMU September 28th. They are going to Dallas-Fort Worth area. That will not be an easy game. I know Florida State has the firepower. I know Florida State is back. I know all this. I'm just saying, they are going to a place that is not easy to win it. SMU loves shootouts. So if the defense can stay as consistent as they was last year, the defense I'm talking about, Florida State should be able to win this game. but there was a slip up in the defense. Florida State would find themselves in a shootout. Oh, and by the way, Florida State has DJ Uiagalelei as their quarterback now, who has not been as great as everybody thought he'll be at Clemson. Then he went to Oregon State, had an okay season, but it wasn't spectacular. Now he's at his third school, which is Florida State. Let's see what he does on the Mike Norwell. Speaking of Clemson, to begin the month of October, they host the Clemson Tigers. That's going to be a very important game right there. So you're talking their second conference game is against the Clemson Tigers. Well, technically their third because they play Georgia Tech over in Dublin, Ireland to begin the season. So can't forget about that. And then they go to Duke. Not going to be easy, depending on how Duke looks because they did lose their coach from last year when they had a good season. So depending on how the coaching staff does and how the players do the players still believe in Duke, that probably won't be an easy game. Then they go to Miami, Coral Gables, to take on their arch rival Hurricanes. That's always a fun game to watch between Florida State and Miami. They host North Carolina on the 2nd of November. They go to Notre Dame. They go to South Bend November 9th. And, of course, they host the Florida Gators after Thanksgiving weekend. So, interesting schedule for the Florida State Seminoles. Not as easy. It is doable. We'll see how that goes. For the Clemson Tigers, they open up the season against the Georgia Bulldogs. That game will be taking place I believe, in Atlanta, Georgia, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So you can call it a home game for the Georgia Bulldogs, theoretically, because that's pretty much SEC country, even though the Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket actually reside in LA, in Atlanta. My bad, not LA, in Atlanta. And the Georgia Bulldogs reside in Athens, Georgia. But Atlanta's SEC country, let's be quite honest with it. Then they host Appalachian State, which is never an easy task for any Power 4 team that plays against Appalachian State. Then they begin conference play, one of their conference games against NC State at home before they head to Tallahassee in October, as we mentioned earlier. They do have a matchup with Louisville at Death Valley in Clemson before they go to Blacksburg, Virginia, to take on the Virginia Tech Huskies. I'm looking forward to seeing how improved Virginia Tech is before they host the in-state rival of South Carolina. Now, the team that was in the ACC championship game against Florida State, the Louisville Cardinals. They go to Notre Dame on the 28th of September. They host SMU on the 5th of October. They host Miami on the 19th of October before they go to Death Valley on November 2nd against the Clemson Tigers. And then they finish off at Lexington, Kentucky against in-state rivalry Kentucky. I wonder how motivated Kentucky would be knowing that they're on a 2-year probation. Do they still want bragging rights for the state, which I'm probably sure they want, and they are at home, so I'm looking forward to that game. But that Notre Dame game is the first test for me when it comes to Louisville to see if they are coming back from where they left off at, or are they going to take a step back. If they can go on the road, they can go to South Bend and beat Notre Dame. I think Louisville has a chance to make themselves known in the ACC. Then we get to Miami. As mentioned earlier, they opened their season in the swamp, Gainesville, Florida, against the Florida Gators. We play like every 4 years. So last time we have met with the Miami Hurricanes, we beat the Miami Hurricanes. As a matter of fact, I think we won the last 2 games against Miami. So Florida's on a bit of a winning streak against the Miami Hurricanes. So we'll see if the Florida Gators can continue or Miami get off to a great start. Their next key game would be at home when they host Virginia Tech. They go to Cal. This is part of the reason why this conference realignment is so interesting now. Because California is part of the ACC, so Miami has to take that trip from Coral Gables all the way across country to California, Berkeley, to take on the Cal Golden Bears. That's an interesting trip to make. All right. Then after that, in 2 weeks from that, they got to go to Louisville to take on the Louisville Cardinals before they host Florida State on the 26th of October, and they have Duke coming to Coral Gables on November 2nd. And then NC State Wolfpack. Can NC State ever make that extra leap that people have been looking forward to? Well, let's see. On September 7th, that's the second week of the season, they play Tennessee. That's going to be interesting. What Tennessee versus NC State, ACC versus SEC all right off the bat. That's going to be a fun one to watch. And then 2 weeks from there, on the 21st of September, they go to Death Valley to take on the Clemson Tigers before they come home on the 5th of October to take on the Wake Forest Demon Deacons before they also make the trip that Miami makes all the way to Cal Berkeley to take on the California Golden Bears. So from Raleigh, North Carolina, all the way to California to take on the Golden Bears as a conference game. Then they come home and face Duke on the 9th of November before their in-state rivalry showdown on November 30th, Thanksgiving weekend against the North Carolina Tigers. Now, as you look at these key games for the top 5 in the media poll, ladies and gentlemen, you will notice that what I looked at, Florida State has a difficult road. Memphis, it's going to be tricky because that's like the interesting test, but they do play Georgia Tech, so they might not be as tricky as some may be. Going to LSU is not easy. Going down to Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, not going to be easy. Clemson and Florida State is always a good game to watch. At Duke, depending on how Duke builds on what took place last year, is going to be interesting. At Miami, always a good game to watch. Going to South Bend is never fun for Florida State. We all know that. Those of you who have been watching college football longer than I have, or about the same amount as I have, know that going to Notre Dame is never a fun trip. And then Florida State rivalry has always been is a rivalry, so you know it's going to be fun to watch that game happen up in Tallahassee at Doak Campbell Stadium. Clemson has a more doable task than Florida State. After they play Georgia, they probably gonna get their wake up call with Georgia. They should get them ready for Appalachian State, or Appalachian State. We all know Appalachian State is prone for pulling off upsets, but in Clemson at Death Valley, Clemson should win that one. And then you go in the ACC play. You got NC State at home, which is good. You got Louisville at home, which is good. You go to Florida State. You go to Virginia Tech. 2 tricky games. Basically going to Florida State, that's like a rivalry right there. And nothing comes easy going to Blattsburg, Virginia. And then you host South Carolina, which is a advantage Clemson. Louisville, depending on how they feel from last year, if they can keep rolling like they did last year, they should be in the driver's seat, so to speak. At Notre Dame, tricky game. SMU at home, Miami at home, at Clemson, at Kentucky. Yeah, but you're not the powerhouses that Clemson and Florida State are. So most people don't believe that you continue what you did last year. Miami, when will the U officially come back? This is the season for it to be back. You go to the swamp. If you can beat Florida in the swamp, that's a great start. You hosting Virginia Tech. You got to go to Cal. West Coast trip, never fun. You got to go to Lexington. You got to go to Louisville after that against the Cardinals. You host Florida State and you host Duke. So we can see if Miami can finally become back. Florida State is back. We wait to see if Miami can be officially called back because they are not officially back as of right now. And then NC State, we're just looking for NC State to finally take that next step so we can take them seriously. Because when it comes to, let's see how you play against Tennessee. If you knock out the Volunteers, that's the first step. If you can go to Death Valley and knock out Clemson, okay, now we're talking. You come home and play Wake Forest, you should beat Wake Forest. You go to Cal, never easy trip. You got Duke and you got North Carolina. You don't see Florida State. You don't see Miami. And you don't see Louisville. So 3 teams that are in the top 5, according to the media polls, NC State do not face. They do not face Florida State. They don't face Louisville, and they don't face Miami. Now, can you pull off a shocker against Tennessee Volunteers? Can you go to Death Valley and hang with the Clemson Tigers? And after that, the road is smooth sailing for y'all. We don't know what type of Wake Forest team we're going to see. Cal has never been that good in football, but we shall see how they look for their first year in the ACC. Duke, we trying to figure out how can Duke maintain what they did last year with a whole new coaching style. And North Carolina, we'll see what Mike Brown does with this group that he has now this year. So that's where we at. But all that being said, I know all my friends, family, Gator Nation are probably shaking their head at me for this one. Yes, I picked the Florida State Seminoles to win the ACC and go back to the ACC champions. It was either between Clemson and Florida State. Remember that I told you it usually take 3 years for a new coach to finally put his footprint on the program. The third year for Mike Norvell got Florida State undefeated and ACC champions. They did not make the playoffs, however. And what happened in the Orange Bowl game against Georgia happened. Throwing all that to the side, if I'm being fair and if I'm being unbiased, I need Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers to show me that they are understanding what the mission is at hand. Because you come out the gate, you got Georgia right out the gate. Kirby Smart ain't playing this year. Kirby Smart is looking for revenge. He did not have the opportunity to defend his back-to-back national championship crown, and he wants payback. Then you got to go to Tallahassee. Tallahassee is hosting the Clemson Tigers, not Clemson hosting the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State is hosting Clemson. Florida State is hosting Florida. Now, they do got to go to Notre Dame. They do got to go to Miami, which is tricky world games. But the other big games, home to Clemson, home to North Carolina, home to Florida. That gives Florida State the advantage. So, yes, I am picking Florida State. As you can see here, we have the Big Four conferences, and I am picking the Florida State Seminoles to win the ACC. I'm sorry that y'all feel that way, but I had to be unbiased. I had to put my bias to the side and be objective when I do this podcast.